Hey everyone, in today's video we're going to be learning about React Router and how to use it in a simple React application. React Router is essentially one of the staples of every single React application, and it's going to be the last thing we cover before we do a nice sizable React project in our next video. Now, I've done React Router a lot in the past with my Material UI series. If you're not familiar with Material UI, it's just a UI library like Bootstrap for React, and a lot of their components can use React Router. I've done videos with drawers, I've done videos with tabs, with headers, and of course with breadcrumbs. And I will link to all these videos in this description, and you can get the code sandbox links for all of them. For example, here's one that I've made with the header, where if you click the home page, it will take you to the home page. If you click contact, it will go to /contact, and if you click about, it will go to /about. We're going to make something similar in this video, but obviously because we're not using a UI library like Material UI, it's not going to look as good, but rest assured it will go over React Router just as much as you need. And if you find value in this video, please consider leaving a comment, liking, or subscribing to the channel. I can't tell you how much it helps get these videos out there, and it helps with the YouTube algorithm. So thank you so much for everyone that's been doing that, and I try my best to read every single comment and even reply in whenever I get the time to. So let's dive right in. React Router is essentially what will allow your application to go from one page, quote unquote, to another page. And the reason I say that in quotes is because the URL is changing, but the actual page itself is not changing. Only the things that need to be re-rendered are going to be changing. And if you remember my first introduction to React video, we went over that and we looked at sites where, for example, on the Walmart site, when you click a different tab, so let's go to the Walmart site just for an example, really quickly. Whenever you click a different link or a different tab, the whole website would change. For example, when I click Halloween, you can see the whole website reloaded. But for single page applications, when you go to a different URL, you can see only the things that need to render and re-render will actually change. And this is one of the coolest parts. You can still use the back button to get where you previously were, but of course, only the things that are re-rendering are going to change on the page, and you're not going to be reloading everything. For example, an entire header that you have. We're not going to go into the header in this video, and like I said, if you want to see how that is done, you can go ahead and watch the header video, which is going to be in the description, but we're just going to look at basic React routing. So I'll zoom in a bit. As you can see here, I just have a simple sandbox.io application set up, and in here I just have a couple of different buttons, and I want it so that whenever I click on one of these buttons, it will go to the respective URL for that button as well as display the respective component. You can see I've made 3 components for each one of these buttons, one to represent the About Us page. These are very simple components. All they say is this is the About page, or this is the Contact page, or this is the Home page, and we simply just want to display that over here when we go ahead and click the button and go to that URL. So when it comes to React Router, there are 3 main components that you have to know about. And when I say components, I mean sort of steps that you need to know about. The first thing is what is known as a provider. Now, a lot of different components in React will have these things called providers, especially when you start using more complex libraries like Redux and, for example, this router library. And what this does is it allows anywhere that this that any component in your application that is a child of this router provider will be able to use the rest of the router components, to put it simply. So generally speaking, when you have a provider, you want to put it at the top level of your application. If we go into the example that I was showing you guys before, if we click on this index, you can see here that in our case, for React Router, we're going to be using something known as BrowserRouter. And that BrowserRouter provider, we are going to nest at the highest level of our application, which is our index.js. So let's go ahead and do that. And you'll see even in their example in their application, they do the same thing, but because they only have one main file, which is just app.js, because they wanted to keep their example simple, they nested it at the top of app.js. Generally speaking, you're going to be doing most of that in index.js because it wraps around app.js anyways. So let's go ahead and import BrowserRouter, and we're going to alias it as router. And you can see here we haven't installed the dependencies. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy react-router-dom, which is the library we're going to use. And if you're on Code Sandbox, you can simply come here to add dependency, type the name in, and let's just make sure that's the right one. Yep. So react-router-dom. You can go ahead and click that. If you are not on Code Sandbox IO, all you have to do is go into your terminal where you have your application running and make sure you're in your directory. Type npm I and then react-router-dom, and that will install it for you. And then you can go ahead and restart your application. So now we have the library installed. The first thing we're going to do is we're just simply going to wrap our application in our router component, our browser router component that is aliased as router. And we can go ahead and do that by just simply making some opening tags and some closing tags around the app itself. So the first step is done. Now everything that is nested inside of these router tags will be able to control things like the URL in the application, and it will be able to access with specific hooks and stuff like that, specific functions that will allow you to change the screen that you are on. So for example, now we can go into app.js and let's just implement the most simplest application that we possibly can. So what we are going to do is, you can see here in this app.js, we have the ability to, for example, create different routes in a switch statement. And if you come over here in the React Router documentation, I'll scroll in a bit more just to this specific part. The switch statement is sort of the main way that you determine what the user will see depending on what URL they are on. So within this switch statement, you can see here they have multiple routes. For example, in this route, they have if the path is equal to /about, they are going to display the about component. If the route is equal to /users, they're going to display the /users component. And if the route is equal to just /, they are going to simply display the home component. And we're going to do something very similar in our application. So I'm going to come over here. In some cases, it would be nice to, because these switch statements can get quite big depending on the application that you are doing. You can put these switch statements in its own component and then import them here. But for this video, since we're just going over the basics of React Router, we're just going to put it over here. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and import switch and route from react-router-dom. So I'm going to come over here. We don't need this browser router anymore, and we will get to link in a further part of this video. So once we have those two things imported, we can start with making our switch statement. We'll just make the opening and closing tags. And then in each one, we can have a new route. And let's make the opening and closing tags for this one route. And in this one route, what we are going to do is we are going to add a path parameter. So let's do the about page first. We're going to add the path parameter here. And then we are going to have the component that we want to display when the path is equal to that. So for example, we right now have the path for about. So I'm going to go ahead and import about from ./about, which is the component that I made over here before the video started. And in here, we're just going to simply call the about with self-closing tags. Now we're going to go ahead and save that. And if I were to now go to our application on Code Sandbox and type in /about as our URL, you will see here that below all of this stuff, it displays the about. You can think of these switch statements as just one big if statement that's saying, okay, if the path is about, then display the about component. And we can go ahead and copy this logic and display the rest of the components as well. So we can display the contact. If it's a contact, we can go ahead and import our contact component, just like this, and display it here. And then finally, for the home page, let's just make it so if it's at, the regular just /, it will display the home page. So let's go ahead and import it as well. And we'll make the component that displays home. So now we can see here we're on /about. If I were to change that to /content, contact, sorry, you would see that it displays contact. And if we were just go to slash, you'll see it display slash. Now you might be noticing when I'm editing the URL and clicking enter, it reloads everything on the page. Not like what I said would happen in this sandbox .io, where if I change the page, only the content changes. That is because in any application, if you are editing it from the URL itself and clicking enter, it will no matter what perform a hard refresh and go to that page. Now we want to make it so if I click these buttons, it will simply go to those pages. Now the way we can do that is a couple of different ways, and I'm going to run you through each of them. So the first thing we're going to look at is something called history.push. Now, history.push is something that a lot of applications use, but there are still use cases for it even now, but there are sometimes even better ways to use it than history.push. And what that will do is we can program each one of these buttons so that when I click it, it will simply go to a different URL. It'll change the URL, and that's what the history.push function does. So let's see if we can find any examples of that on here. History.push. So in order to use history, first of all, we can use this React hook called use history. Where did it go? Use history. Okay, we're on the documentation. Okay, so we can see here that if I were to, for example, that's weird. It didn't straight up when I clicked it. Ironically enough, it didn't link me straight here. Okay, here we go. Use history. So this use history function is a hook, and the history is actually an object that comes from the router props. Now, what I want to show before we go into this is what the all the props that you can actually get and all the objects you can actually get from the React router code. So for example, you can see here that in this example where I have the header in my Material UI example, when I do the route stuff, I'm actually doing it a bit differently. You can see here that I'm writing it all inside of the route, and I'm just choosing what to display here. And that is another alternative way to do it. So instead of just having the route and then having the component you want to display nested inside of it, you can also do it like this. Let me actually just copy the about, since it'll be the exact same. So you can see here, let's take a look at how this code looks. Let me go ahead and zoom in a bit. So you can see here for the route, oops, let's get rid of that. What I can do is, for example, I can add a couple other parameters into my route component. So for example, this exact we don't have to worry about right now, and we will get into future videos. But instead of having about as a child, or the component you want to display as a child of these components, you can actually nest it inside of a render attribute. And when you put that inside of the render attribute, you can actually pass in props, which is going to be the React router props, into the component. So if I were to go into our about page and I were to go ahead and console.log the props to see all the props that are being passed in, you will see all the props that inherently will come into the component from our React router. And let's go ahead and let's go ahead and zoom this out a bit and make this a bit bigger. Now let's go ahead and refresh and go to the about page. You will see here that React Router will pass in, and let me see if I can zoom in so it's a bit easier to read, 3 props into our component. The first one is called history. The second one is called location, and the third one is called match. Now, you will use each one of these things in different use cases, but for our examples, I'll just give a brief overview about what each one of these does. History is what sort of stores the previous places that you have been, and it is the object that will allow you, if you do .push, to go from one place to another. Location will store the current path name that you are at, and this is very useful to have. For example, if you are on a specific page and you want to know, what page you are on, what slash you are on, you can, in the location object, you have this path name parameter. So no matter where you are in your application, you can see what path you are on and make logic in your application for that. And you might even see that in some of these material UI examples. And then finally you have match, and this is useful because you can have stuff like parameters in here. So if you had query parameters for the page that you were on, you would extract them from this match object. And we're not going to go into complex examples like that in this video. I might make another video going even more in depth into React Router, or in our project we might do that. But it's good to know that these are the things that you can do, and that is another way you can sort of call the nested component if you wanted to pass any of these in there. For this video, we don't really need to pass any of that stuff in there. I'll still leave it here for your reference if you were to come onto this codesandbox.io, but for this video, we don't need to do any of that. What we do, however, need is we need to find a way to get the history object hooked up to these buttons, so when I click them, it will simply go to that page that we are on. So now we can go ahead and hide this again and make our code a bit bigger. So what we can do, like I was saying, is use this use history hook. This use history hook will allow you to, you can use it anywhere that is nested from our router provider. And what you do is you just import it, and what it'll do is when you define it, it will just allow you to simply use the history object wherever you are without needing it to be passed in as a prop or anything like that. So just over here, I can say const history equals use history, and then on this button, for example, on the About Us button, I can create an on-click handler. And on click, I just want to do history.push to the URL that I want. So that URL, okay. Sorry, Windows is trying to update as usual. And then on click, all it will do, and I can add one for each one of these, all it will do is call history.push on, and then the URL that I want it to go to. So for the contact us button, I want it to go to contact us, and then for the about, I want it to go to /about, and for the homepage, I want it to go to /home. So let's go ahead and hook that up, refresh our application, and now you'll see if I click the contact us page, it will simply go to /contact and display this to the contact us page. If I go to home, it'll go to just / and display this to the home page, and then about us, it will go to about. And those are all the working components that are really the basic knowledge you need to know about React Router. Number one, the provider you have to wrap your application around. Number two, the switch statement that is really just one big if statement that determines what component you want to show depending on what URL you're on. And then number three, your basic history stuff to determine what you want to push to. And I'm finally going to show you one other way to do this without buttons and history.push. So over here, we are going to import a link component, and you can see here if I can go back to that example, let's see. If I were to come back here, you will see here that when they make their buttons, they simply wrap them in these links, and these links have a to parameter that will simply under the hood call the history.push, and that's exactly what we are going to do. So instead of having buttons here, let's substitute that with the link component, and then just have a to equal to /about. And let's go ahead and so you'll see here that it will display it as a link, and when I click it, let's go to a different page. When I click it, it will go to the about page. So that's another way to do it if you wanted to, for example, have that show up in links. And I think you could probably even nest it in the button. Let's try nesting that in the button. Oops. Close our tags. You can see here that if you nest in the button, it'll still show the hyperlinking, but I believe there should be like a prop or something like that. If I were to Google like React Router link props or something, you might see, or if I even type in React Router link no hyperlink, so a lot of people are some guys like, how do I make it not hyperlinked? And a lot of people on Stack Overflow are like, well, just use history.push, which is one way to do it. But I'm sure there is, I'm surprised I couldn't find it on the documentation for the link function. Yeah, Well, there's probably a way to do it. I won't waste time trying to go into it in this video, but the link, like I said, is just to illustrate that when you have the to attribute, it will simply just act as a history.push under the hood. So yeah, that is pretty much it, and I hope you found value in this video, and if you did, please remember to either like, comment, or subscribe. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm, and I'm really excited for the next video, which is going to be a project that is going to use everything that we have learned up until this point. So hope you guys are staying safe and have an amazing day.